The chamber was vast enough to make distance feel like silence. Its walls rose in smooth arcs of dark crystal, stretching so high that the ceiling dissolved into a soft blue haze far above. Light filtered down from that unseen height in slow, drifting currents, illuminating a circular floor polished to a mirror sheen. At its center stood the conclave table, wide enough to seat 100 delegates, each position shaped and calibrated to the needs of a different species. They were all present, creatures of scale and symmetry, beings of fluid forms contained in hovering fields, tall, scaled diplomats whose eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, others whose bodies never touched the ground at all, suspended by invisible forces or held upright by mechanical frames older than most civilizations. Some had crossed stars for 10,000 years. Some had ended wars that reshaped entire sectors. All of them had come because something unusual had been filed. A declaration. At the center of the chamber stood Ambassador Sereth Val of the Karth Dominion. He was tall, even among his own kind. His form was encased in layered plates of dark green chitin that reflected the chamber's blue light in dull, shifting patterns. His eyes, narrow, amber, unblinking, moved slowly across the assembly as if measuring it. He did not bow. He did not greet. When he spoke, his voice was sharp and controlled, translated instantly into every known language. The human species, he began, has violated Karth-controlled transit corridors 14 times in the last 2 standard cycles. The chamber remained quiet. Not tense, just attentive. They have been warned, Sereth continued. They have been issued formal notices. They have been instructed to withdraw. A slight pause. They did not comply. A few delegates shifted, not out of concern, but mild interest. Sereth raised one of his segmented hands. A projection flickered into existence above the center of the table, clean, precise, and cold. A small cargo vessel. Human. Broken apart in the dark. 6 days ago, he said, a human transport entered restricted space. It was destroyed. No embellishment. No emotion. The crew did not survive. The projection faded. Somewhere along the far side of the chamber, a low murmur passed between 2 delegates. It was not outrage. It was calculation. 12 lives, perhaps more, but in the scale of the conclave, it was small. Sereth let the silence settle. Then he delivered the real message. The Karth Dominion does not request permission, he said. We do not negotiate territorial authority already established. His gaze swept the room again, slower this time. We are here to inform the conclave that a formal declaration of subjugation has been issued against the human species. There was final. They will recognize Dominion control over the Kepler corridor. They will compensate for resource expenditures incurred during repeated warnings. They will submit formal acknowledgement of Karth's sovereignty. A longer pause now. If they fail to comply within 30 standard days, Sereth finished, their refusal will be interpreted as an act of aggression. His voice did not rise. We will respond accordingly. He lowered his hand and stepped back. For a moment, the chamber was still. Then, quietly, almost politely, sound returned. Not alarm. Not fear. Laughter. Not loud. Not disrespectful. But present. A ripple of quiet amusement passed between clusters of delegates. A few leaned toward one another, exchanging low remarks. Others simply watched with detached curiosity, the way one might observe a predictable outcome already set in motion. Near the outer ring, a representative of the Pell Union turned slightly toward their aide. How long? They asked in a voice barely above a whisper. The aide considered. 2 cycles, they replied. Perhaps 3. A subtle nod. On the far side of the table, a different figure remained completely still. Her seat was slightly smaller than the others, not out of insult, but because the conclave had not yet updated its configurations after granting humanity provisional membership. Commander Yara Solis sat upright, hands resting lightly on the surface before her. She had not moved once during the declaration. Dark hair pulled back. Expression neutral. Eyes steady. She had not looked at the projection of the destroyed ship. She had not reacted when the word subjugation was spoken. She had simply listened. When the chamber quieted again, the conclave speaker, a tall, pale figure whose voice carried without amplification, turned slightly toward her position. The human delegation, the speaker said, may respond. Every gaze in the chamber shifted. Some curious, some amused. The few, very few, watchful. Yara stood. No rush. No hesitation. She did not activate any display. She did not consult any notes. She looked directly at Sareth Vol. He looked back at her with the same expression one might give something small that had wandered too far from where it belonged. Yara held that gaze for a moment. Then she spoke. "We'll get back to you." Nothing more. No explanation. No argument. No protest. Just that. She sat down. This time, the silence was different. Not heavier. Just less certain. A few of the earlier smiles lingered, but not as easily as before. Some delegates exchanged glances, subtle, questioning. Others leaned back in their seats, studying the human representative with slightly more attention than they had given her before. On the far side of the chamber, a thin, pale-eyed Theri observer made a small notation on a handheld slate. She did not smile. At the center of the room, Sareth Vol remained standing for a fraction longer than necessary. Then, without comment, he turned and walked toward the exit with the rest of the Dominion delegation. He did not look back. The session ended minutes later. Formalities were observed. Records were logged. Delegates dispersed in quiet clusters, already moving on to the next matter that required their attention. For most of them, the outcome felt obvious. A minor species. A predictable correction. A short conflict if it even reached that stage. Nothing that would reshape the balance of the conclave. But in one corner of the chamber, as the lights dimmed and the great hall began to empty, the Theri observer paused before leaving. She looked once more at the place where the human had been sitting. Then she reviewed her note. For simple words. She read them again, slowly. Then saved the file. Response indicates no fear. The Karth command station did not resemble the conclave chamber. There was no attempt at beauty. No symbolic architecture. No effort to impress. It was built for function. A dense structure of layered alloy and reinforced shielding, suspended in the cold dark at the edge of the Kepler corridor. Its surfaces were angular, efficient, and scarred in places from encounters long past. Every section of it existed for a purpose: command, analysis, coordination, control. War did not require elegance. Only accuracy. Ambassador Sareth Vol stood alone in his private office, a narrow room overlooking a wide observation port. Beyond it, the stars burned quietly, indifferent to the decisions being made inside. A data file hovered in the air before him. Humanity. He had delayed opening it until now. Not out of concern. Out of prioritization. Now, with the declaration issued and the conclave informed, it was time to review the subject of compliance. He activated the file. Species designation, human. Classification, emerging/non-strategic. Spacefaring duration, 92 standard years. Primary activity, trade, exploration, colony development. Sareth read in silence. Fleet composition appeared first. Limited. Most vessels categorized as cargo or multi-role support. A small number of dedicated warships, none exceeding mid-tier conclave standards. Weapon systems were listed as functional but outdated. Directed energy, kinetic platforms, nothing innovative. Shielding, below average. Armor, minimal. No specialized biological adaptations for vacuum exposure. No natural defensive traits. No regenerative capabilities beyond standard cellular repair. A soft species. The file continued. Strategic behavior. Low conflict exposure. No recorded participation in large-scale interspecies war. Internal conflicts noted in early planetary history, now considered obsolete. Sareth's eyes paused on that line for a fraction of a second, then moved on. Threat assessment. Class 3, limited relevance. Potential for future development, moderate. Immediate concern, negligible. He dismissed the first layer of data with a small movement of his hand. Predictable. Entirely predictable. Primitive, he said quietly, not as an insult, but as a conclusion. Behind him, the door opened with a soft mechanical shift. Sir. Sareth did not turn. Restel, he said. You reviewed this file? Yes. Is there anything in it that warrants reconsideration of our position? There was a pause. Not long, but longer than usual. Sareth noticed. Now he turned. Restel stood near the doorway, holding his own interface tablet close to his chest. He was younger, his plates lighter in color, his posture less rigid than most command officers. He was known for one trait above all others: thoroughness. Yes, Restel said slowly. There is an additional section. Sareth said nothing. Restel stepped forward and brought the file up between them. It is not part of the main classification, he continued. It is an appendix. Filed separately. Why? It was submitted by a Thari xenopsychologist approximately 21 standard years ago. It was not integrated into the primary assessment. Reason? Restel hesitated. It was marked as anomalous. Sareth made a small motion. Show me. The display shifted. A new heading appeared. Appendix 7, Behavioral Analysis, Human Stress Response. The formatting was different. Less rigid. More detailed. Sareth's eyes moved across the first lines. Summary. Human behavioral patterns under low to moderate stress fall within expected parameters for emerging cooperative species. Under high stress, patterns begin to diverge. Under existential threat conditions, divergence becomes extreme. Sareth's gaze sharpened slightly. Define extreme, he said. Restel did not answer immediately. Instead, he highlighted a section. Key observation. Unlike the majority of conclave species, humans do not consistently follow de-escalation models when faced with overwhelming force. Standard response pattern, observed in 87% of species. Withdraw. Negotiate. Submit. Human response pattern, observed across multiple historical datasets. Adapt. Intensify. Escalate. Sareth read the line again. Then once more. His expression did not change. An overinterpretation, he said, based on limited data. There is more, Restel replied quietly. Another section opened. Warning marker. Human cognitive response to existential threat appears to override self-preservation thresholds. Fear response does not reduce engagement. It refines it. Non-essential processes are suppressed. Focus increases. Risk tolerance rises significantly. Outcome. Human groups under extreme pressure often become more effective, not less. The room was silent. Sareth stepped closer to the display. Source of this conclusion? He asked. Historical records, Restel said. Pre-spaceflight conflicts. Environmental survival patterns. Early interplanetary incidents. Outdated, Sareth said. Possibly, Restel agreed. But the pattern is consistent. Sareth turned slightly, looking past the display toward the stars beyond the glass. Soft biology, he said. Limited fleet. No war experience at scale. Restel did not respond. Sareth looked back at him. You believe this appendix overrides the primary classification? No, Restel said carefully. I believe it contradicts it. Another pause. Sareth considered that. Then he reached out and closed the appendix. The main file returned. Simple. Predictable. He let it hover there for a moment. Then dismissed it entirely. They are a trade species, he said. Restel's grip tightened slightly on his tablet. They move goods between small colonies. They have not fought a war beyond their own world. He stepped back toward the observation port. They do not have the experience required for sustained conflict. Restel lowered his gaze for a fraction of a second. Yes, sir. Sareth folded his hands behind his back. Appendix 7 will remain archived, he said. No changes to classification. Yes, sir. Sareth did not look at him. Prepare the subjugation notice for transmission to their home system. Restel hesitated. Timeline? 30 standard days, Sareth said. As declared. And if they do not respond? Saratha's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Then they will learn. Restel closed his tablet. Yes, sir. He turned and left the room. Sarath remained where he was. The stars beyond the station were still, unchanged, silent. He stood there for a long time. Then, without thinking about why, he reopened the file. Not the main classification. The appendix. Under existential threat, humans escalate. He stared at the line. Just for a moment. Then he closed it again. They won't, he said quietly. Across the station, the transmission array powered up. A signal was prepared. Encoded. Official. Final. On Earth, it would arrive in a few hours. The message arrived at 1412 local time. Geneva. United Earth Council Chamber. It did not come with sound or spectacle. No alarms. No emergency sirens. Just a secure transmission request that appeared silently across every authorized terminal in the room. Priority, absolute. Origin, Karth Dominion. The session paused. The room itself was nothing like the conclave chamber. No towering ceilings. No monumental architecture. Just a wide circular table, standard lighting, reinforced walls, and a coffee machine in the corner that had been out of order for 11 days. There were no observers. No ceremony. Only people. The message was opened. Displayed. Read once. Then read again. And then, for a moment, no one spoke. General Amara Chen was the first to move. She leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes scanning the text one last time before setting it aside. Timeline, she said. 30 days, replied the Secretary of Defense. Formal compliance window. Amara nodded once. Right. She tapped the surface of the table. The display shifted instantly, replacing the message with a layered map of the Kepler corridor and surrounding sectors. Blue lines, red markers, projected movement paths. Fleet positions. Not theoretical. Not preliminary. Ready. We've had first response on standby for 8 months, she said. Corridor approach has 2 viable entry points. Both are already mapped and simulated. She expanded the projection. We know where their command station is. We know their patrol patterns. We know their resupply intervals. Someone across the table spoke. We haven't tried negotiation. Amara didn't look up. They didn't offer negotiation. A brief pause. They offered submission. Silence again. She finally lifted her gaze, looking around the room, at ministers, analysts, officers, advisors. People who had spent decades preparing for problems that most hoped would never happen. Does anyone here believe, she said evenly, that submitting to the Karth Dominion will make them stop? No one answered. Not because they were unsure. Because they already knew. Amara nodded once. Good, she said. Then we're not submitting. The meeting lasted 4 hours. There were no raised voices. No arguments. Just decisions. Direct. Final. When it ended, there was no press conference. No public statement. No announcement. The message remained classified. But across Earth, and far beyond it, things began to move. In orbit above the Pacific, Dockyard's 7 reactivated dormant production lines. Crews that had been on rotation leave were recalled without explanation. Fuel reserves that had been sitting untouched were authorized for immediate transfer. On Luna, 3 carrier platforms shifted from maintenance status to combat readiness within 6 hours. No ceremony. No broadcast. Just quiet efficiency. On Mars, a logistics hub rerouted supply chains that had been laid months earlier. They did not create new routes. They activated existing ones. Hidden ones. Paths that had been prepared long before the Karth message ever arrived. Across 3 continents, shipyards lit up through the night. Not in panic. In rhythm. Back in Geneva, the council chamber slowly emptied. Papers were gathered. Displays shut down. Chairs pushed back into place. The broken coffee machine remained exactly as it was. Far from the council chamber, in a coastal city in Japan, the evening was calm. The sea was flat, reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. Fishing boats moved slowly along the horizon. The air smelled faintly of salt and warm concrete. Inside a small apartment overlooking the water, Hannah Sato sat at her kitchen table. The news was on. Muted. She didn't need the sound. The headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen anyway. Unconfirmed reports of external ultimatum, government silent. Across from her, her grandson Kenji sat with his school tablet open, frowning at a math problem. He glanced up at the screen, then back at her. "Is it bad?" he asked. Hannah didn't answer immediately. She poured tea into her cup, steady hands, no rush. Outside, a wave broke gently against the shore. "We'll be fine," she said. Kenji looked at her. "How do you know?" She took a small sip, then set the cup down. Her eyes moved briefly to the window, to the quiet ocean beyond it. "They don't know who they're talking to," she said. Kenji didn't fully understand. He nodded anyway, and went back to his work. On the 15th day, the first fleet moved. There was no announcement, no broadcast, no spectacle. 47 warships, 20 support vessels, 6 carrier platforms. They departed in silence, slipping free from Earth's orbit and vanishing into the dark between stars. The conclave noticed. Of course they did. Observers tracked the movement within minutes. Data passed quietly between intelligence networks. A Pell Union analyst reviewed the numbers and leaned back in his chair. "That's it," he said. His assistant nodded. "That's the full deployment." The analyst considered the projection. The Karth Dominion maintained over 300 warships in the Kepler corridor alone. He exhaled softly. "It won't last long," he said. He drafted a brief report. Subject: human fleet movement. Assessment: limited engagement capability. Prediction: conflict duration less than 1 standard cycle. Recommendation: no additional monitoring required. He sent it. His superiors approved it. Resources were reassigned elsewhere. Back on the Karth command station, the message arrived on the 17th day. No voice. No image. Just text. Precise. In the common language of the conclave. 2 elements. The first: coordinates. Exact. Not estimated. Not approximate. Exact. Down to the kilometer. Sareth Val stared at the numbers. His eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized them immediately. They were not general sector coordinates. They were not regional markers. They were his command station. The second element. A single sentence. "We know where you are." The room felt colder. Not physically. Something else. Sareth read the message again. Then once more. Behind him, the door opened. "Sir?" Restel stepped inside. Sareth did not turn. "The coordinates," he said. "How did they obtain them?" Restel moved closer, already pulling up system logs. "Our station has been under blackout protocols for 6 months, he said. Position shifts every 72 hours. Randomized drift. He paused. By all models, our location should be unknown. Saratha's reflection stared back at him from the glass. "They're bluffing," he said. Restel didn't respond. Sareth turned slightly. "They want us to feel observed," he continued. "It's psychological." Still nothing. "Say what you're thinking," Sareth said. Restel hesitated. "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "that I wish we had read Appendix 7 more closely." Sareth looked back out at the stars. The human fleet was out there. 47 ships. Soft bodies. Basic weapons. He told himself it didn't matter. That numbers would decide this. That experience would decide this. That history would decide this. But that night, for the first time, he did not sleep. The first engagement began at the edge of the Kepler corridor. A region of space defined not by borders, but by traffic, dense lanes of travel between systems, marked by invisible routes and long-established control zones. For 600 years, the Karth Dominion had owned those lanes. No one challenged that. Not anymore. The Dominion fleet arrived first. 40 warships. They formed a clean defensive line across the corridor's primary entry point, their hulls aligned with geometric precision. Each vessel was larger than any single human warship on record, layered with reinforced shielding and heavy weapon arrays designed for sustained combat. They did not rush. They did not maneuver. They waited, because that was how these encounters always ended. The opposing force would arrive. It would assess the imbalance. And it would withdraw. The human fleet dropped out of transit 11 minutes later. 47 warships. 20 support vessels. 6 carriers. They did not form a perfect line. They did not match formation symmetry. They spread, not randomly, but not predictably either. On the Karth flagship, Sareth Val stood at the center of the command deck, watching the human fleet resolve across the tactical display. "They're out of formation," one of his officers said. "Disorganized," another added. Sareth said nothing. "Range. Closing. How long until engagement?" 2 minutes. The pause. "They'll turn," an officer said. "They always do." Sareth did not respond. He watched. On the human carrier Endurance, Commander Yara Solis stood at her station, eyes fixed on the same battlefield from the opposite perspective. Her fleet was smaller. Her ships were lighter. Her margins were thinner. None of that mattered. She spoke once, her voice calm. Final instruction. Every ship in the fleet received it simultaneously. 4 words. Don't let them breathe. The distance collapsed. The Karth fleet opened fire first. A wall of energy surged across the void. Precise, synchronized, overwhelming. Beams of concentrated light and kinetic bursts designed to cripple an advancing force before it could even close to effective range. It should have worked. It always had. The human fleet did not slow down. It accelerated. On the Karth tactical display, the expected pattern failed immediately. The human ships did not hold formation. They split, scattered across multiple vectors, breaking into smaller groups that moved independently, each one adjusting its trajectory in ways that made predictive targeting difficult. "They're fragmenting," an officer said. "Tracking solutions degraded," another added. "Multiple vectors." "Maintain fire," Sareth said. The Dominion fleet adjusted, weapons recalibrating, sweeping across the incoming targets. Several human ships were hit. One broke apart instantly. Another lost propulsion, drifting into the dark. A third vanished in a bloom of light. They did not stop. On the Endurance, Yara watched the losses register across her display. She did not react. "Group 3, push left corridor," she said. "Group 5, close the gap." Her fleet moved like something alive. Not rigid. Not fixed. Flexible. Ships breaking apart, reforming, crossing each other's paths, exploiting small openings in the Dominion line that existed for only seconds at a time. "They're not engaging as a unified force," a Karth officer said. "They're not supposed to," another replied. At 20,000 kilometers, the human fleet entered effective engagement range. That was when the real shift happened. Instead of trading fire at distance, they closed. "Range collapse," an officer warned. "Intercept vectors." "Too fast," another said. "They're inside the envelope." Human ships surged forward, pushing directly into the Dominion formation. Not around it. Through it. At close range, the Dominion advantage narrowed. Their larger weapons were harder to bring to bear. Their formations, designed for distance engagement, became constraints instead of strengths. Human ships slipped between them, targeting weak points. Striking from angles the Dominion models had not prioritized. 3 human ships were destroyed in the first hour. Not by accident. By design. On the Karth flagship, Sareth watched as one damaged human vessel, already venting atmosphere, altered course at the last second. Instead of retreating, it drove directly into the space between 2 Dominion cruisers. "They've lost control of that vessel," an officer said. Saretha's eyes narrowed. "No," he said quietly. "They haven't." The ship detonated. Not randomly. Precisely. The blast disrupted both cruisers, forcing them out of alignment. Shielding flickered. Formation broke. Just enough. Just long enough. The rest of the human fleet poured through the opening. "They're using their own losses," Restel said under his breath. "Adjust formation," an officer shouted. But it was already too late. The line had been compromised. On the Endurance, Yara didn't look at the explosion. She was already moving to the next step. Advance groups 2 and 4, she said. Keep pressure. Don't give them time to reset. The battle stretched. Minutes became hours. The Dominion fleet adapted, slowly, methodically, but every adjustment they made was met by something unexpected. Human ships didn't behave the way models predicted. They didn't preserve formation integrity. They didn't withdraw when damaged. They didn't disengage when outmatched. They stayed. They pressed. They forced the Dominion fleet into constant reaction. By the 7th hour, the corridor was filled with debris. Broken hull fragments. Fading energy trails. Ships drifting without power. On both sides. The numbers came in. Dominion losses, 19 warships. Human losses, 9 warships. On paper, it should have been a decisive Dominion victory. Instead, it was something else. On the Conclave observation feeds, the reaction was immediate. Silence. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Recognition. They held, one analyst said quietly. They pushed, another corrected. Back on the Karth flagship, Sareth stood motionless. His fleet still held the corridor. Technically. But the shape of the battle, the outcome, none of it aligned with expectation. They didn't retreat, one of his officers said. Sareth didn't answer. On the Endurance, Yara finally allowed herself to sit. Not in relief. In acknowledgement. She looked at the tactical display one last time. Then gave a single order. Pull back. The human fleet disengaged. Not in chaos. In control. Ships breaking contact in coordinated vectors, slipping back into the dark from which they had come. They did not pursue victory. They had already taken what they came for. Back in the conclave chamber, the same seats that had held quiet laughter days earlier were now occupied by something else entirely. Tension. Focus. Concern. And somewhere, in a quiet archive no one had cared to open, a line of text waited. Under existential threat, humans escalate. For the first time, it was no longer theoretical. The conclave observation chamber was full. Every seat occupied. Every standing space taken. The quiet hum of translation systems filled the air as delegates and analysts watched the battle recordings replay across the central display. No one laughed anymore. The footage looped in silence. Human ships breaking formation. Closing distance. Absorbing losses. Pushing forward when logic suggested retreat. It did not look efficient. It did not look elegant. It looked wrong. And yet it worked. At the front of the chamber, seated slightly apart from the main delegation rows, was Dr. Ellen Varesh of the Thari. She had been present during the initial declaration. She had been the one who wrote the appendix. Now, for the first time in 21 years, someone had asked her to speak about it. The conclave speaker turned toward her. Dr. Varesh, the speaker said, you authored the behavioral analysis attached to the human classification file. Yes, she replied. You may address the assembly. She stood slowly, carrying a thin data slate in one hand. She did not activate it. She did not need to. Instead, she looked at the room. At the beings who had dismissed her work. At the same ones who were now watching something they did not understand. How many of you, she asked calmly, have read Appendix 7 in full? No one answered. That was answer enough. She nodded once. I expected that, she said. She stepped forward slightly, her voice steady, clear across every translation channel. Then I will summarize what you chose not to read. A faint shift moved through the chamber. Attention sharpened. Most species in this room, she continued, evolved under conditions where survival favored avoidance. When confronted with a superior threat, the correct response, biologically, culturally, strategically, is to withdraw, to preserve, to endure. Several delegates nodded subtly. It was obvious. It was universal. Humans did not evolve that way. The pause. Not for effect. For clarity. Their homeworld is not stable, she said. It is not predictable. It is not forgiving. The display behind her flickered to life, showing a rotating image of Earth. Cloud systems swirling across continents. storms, oceans, movement everywhere. For most of their evolutionary history, she said, humans were not the dominant species on their planet. Another image replaced the first. Large predators, hostile environments, unstable climates. They were prey, she said simply. The room was quiet. They lacked natural defenses, she continued. No armored skin, no venom, no superior speed, no environmental immunity. She let that sit. What they had instead, she said, was adaptability. The display shifted again. Now a timeline. Marked with events. These markers, she said, represent major conflicts in human history. Not with other species. With themselves. A murmur moved through the chamber. They fought each other, someone said quietly. Yes, Varesh replied. Constantly. She zoomed the timeline. Clusters of red points grew closer together. They developed weapons capable of destroying entire population centers, she continued. They engaged in conflicts that spanned continents. They rebuilt. And then they did it again. No one spoke. They did not eliminate conflict from their development, she said. They incorporated it. She turned back to the room. This created a pattern. She paused. When humans encounter sustained threat, real threat, not inconvenience, their response diverges from standard models. The display shifted again. Now the words appeared. Simple. Standard response, de-escalate. Human response, intensify. They do not ignore fear, Varesh said. They process it differently. Her eyes moved across the room. Fear, for most species, reduces action. Another pause. For humans, she said, it focuses it. The silence deepened. They remove inefficiency, she continued. They discard non-essential processes. They narrow their priorities to a single question. She let the words land. What must we do to survive this? No one interrupted. No one moved. This is not theoretical, she said. It has been observed repeatedly across their history. She glanced briefly at the battle footage still frozen behind her. You are seeing it now. A delegate near the back spoke, voice low. They are reckless. Varesh shook her head slightly. No, she said. They are precise. She gestured to the display. Their formations appear chaotic because they are not optimized for control. They are optimized for adaptation. She stepped closer to the center. A rigid system performs well under expected conditions, she said. Humans do not assume conditions will remain within expected parameters. Another pause. They assume things will go wrong. A ripple of recognition moved through the analytical observers. They build for failure, she said, and then they continue operating through it. Someone near the front leaned forward. That is inefficient. Varesh allowed herself the smallest shift of expression. In theory, she said. She turned slightly. In practice, you have already seen the result. The room fell completely still. They lost ships, she continued. They took damage. They were outmatched in multiple categories. Her voice did not change. They advanced anyway. Another delegate spoke, more quietly this time. They shouldn't have held that line. They weren't trying to hold it, Varesh replied. She looked directly at him. They were trying to break yours. The implication settled slowly, deeply. They will not respond to pressure the way you expect, she said. Her tone lowered slightly, not softer, but more deliberate. If you increase force, they will not retreat. The beat. They will escalate. No one laughed. No one whispered. They are not the strongest species in this chamber, she said. They are not the most advanced. Another pause. But they are one of the few who have spent 10,000 years learning how to survive when losing. That was the line. It landed. And that, she said quietly, is far more dangerous than strength. She stepped back. The display behind her dimmed. The battle footage disappeared. But the room did not move. No one dismissed her words this time. No one questioned the appendix. Because now, they had seen it. Somewhere far from the chamber, deep in Karth-controlled space, A command station drifted through the dark. And inside it, a single officer stood awake, staring at a line of text he could no longer ignore. Under existential threat, humans escalate. For the first time, it felt less like analysis, and more like a warning. The Karth Dominion did not respond to uncertainty with hesitation. They responded with escalation. The first engagement had not gone as expected. It had not been a loss, not officially, but it had introduced something far more dangerous than defeat. And doubt within the Dominion was not tolerated for long. 3 weeks after the first battle, a new directive was issued from the High Council. It did not involve fleets. It did not involve visible force. It was quieter than that, more precise, more efficient, and, by Dominion standards, more intelligent. The target was a human colony world designated Mira Station. Population, approximately 210,000. Civilian, agricultural, minimal defensive presence. The decision was simple. If humanity would not submit under threat of force, they would submit under pressure. The agent was deployed through the planet's water distribution systems. It was engineered specifically for human biology. Tailored, refined, designed to spread quickly and act decisively. Within 5 days, the first symptoms appeared. Within 10, the hospitals were overwhelmed. Within 15, the numbers began to climb beyond containment. Emergency broadcasts were sent. Requests for aid followed. The conclave observed in silence. Some turned away from the feeds. Others watched. Because they had seen this before. This was how wars ended. Not with fleets. With pressure. With suffering. With the slow realization that continuing to fight would cost more than surrender. That was how it always worked. They waited for the human response. They expected negotiation, appeal, ceasefire request. What they received was none of those things. Exactly 72 hours after the first confirmed fatalities, a report was transmitted from the United Earth Biological Defense Network. It was brief, direct, precise. The agent had been identified, sequenced, countered. A functional treatment had been synthesized and was already being distributed across the colony. Projected containment time, minimal. Casualty estimates, stabilized. The outbreak was under control. The conclave chamber did not react immediately. Not because they did not understand, but because they did. 3 days. It had taken 3 days. Across the chamber, medical specialists began pulling up the data independently, verifying, cross-checking, comparing it against their own models. It should not have been possible. Not at that speed. Not with an unknown pathogen. Not without years of research. A Theri medical officer leaned back slowly. "That's not a response," he said quietly. "That's adaptation." The report had a second section. Classified. It did not remain that way for long. Within days, fragments of it had spread through conclave intelligence channels. The contents were unsettling. In the process of developing the cure, the human research teams had also created a modified version of the original agent. Stronger, more efficient, more lethal. It had been stored, cataloged, secured, not deployed, not tested, not used, just kept. The implications settled over the observers like a slow shadow. They had taken the weapon, understood it, improved it, and then chosen not to use it. In a quiet consultation room adjacent to the main chamber, Dr. Varesh sat across from another Theri physician, reviewing the leaked data. He read it twice, then a third time. "They weaponized it," he said, "in 72 hours. Varesh nodded. "They've been doing this for thousands of years," she said. "Disease, biology, adaptation. Their entire history is full of it." He looked up. "We've been trying to counter standard Dominion bioagents for decades," he said. "We still haven't solved 3 of them." Varesh folded her hands. "To them," she said, "this wasn't a weapon." The pause. It was a problem. He considered that. But why didn't they use it? Varesh's gaze shifted slightly, thoughtful. "Because they don't need to," she said. "And because they have rules." He frowned. "Rules? They built something worse than what was used against them, she said. And then they chose not to deploy it. Another pause. That's not weakness, she added quietly. That's control. The physician leaned back. That makes them more dangerous, he said. Varesh nodded once. Yes, she said. It does. Elsewhere, far from the conclave, another piece of the war unfolded in silence. A Karth scout vessel had been disabled during a skirmish near the corridor. Its sole surviving officer, Grell Tharn, had expected the end. That was how his people operated. Capture was not a state that existed for long. He had prepared himself for termination. Instead, he woke in a human medical bay. The lighting was soft. The air was stable. His injuries had been treated. A fractured limb stabilized. Burns sealed. He did not understand. A human medic stood nearby, adjusting something on a console. She noticed him awake. Activated a translation device. This might hurt a little, she said. I'll try to be quick. There was no threat in her voice. No satisfaction. No hostility. Just information. He was given food. Actual food. More than necessary. He was placed in a room. Not a cage. A room. The door was locked. But there were no restraints. On the third day, a human officer visited him. Not to interrogate. Not to extract information. Just to speak. Origin. Family. Simple questions. No pressure. No deception. Grell answered cautiously, waiting for the shift. For the moment when the kindness would reveal itself as strategy. It never did. When he was returned to Karth space weeks later as part of a formal exchange, he submitted a report. He described what he had experienced. The treatment. The conditions. The conversations. His superiors reviewed it. Then marked it. Psychologically compromised. They concluded he had been subjected to subtle manipulation. Conditioning. Some unknown human method designed to destabilize perception. They rejected the simpler explanation. That he had been treated like a person. Back in the Dominion command station, Sareth Val stood once again at the observation window. The stars had not changed. The war had. Reports moved across his display. Colony failure. Biological countermeasure. Containment achieved. No request for ceasefire. No negotiation. No delay. He replayed the timeline. 72 hours. He closed the report. Then reopened another. Appendix 7. His eyes found the line immediately. They did not hesitate this time. Under existential threat, humans escalate. He stood there for a long time. Long enough for the meaning to settle. Not as theory. Not as analysis. As fact. Behind him, the station continued its operations. Fleet movements. Strategic updates. Preparations for the next phase. Because the Dominion would escalate again. It always did. That was how it maintained control. That was how it won. Sareth looked out into the dark. At the space where the human fleet had disappeared. And for the first time, he understood something that had not been in the file. Not in the appendix. Not in any report. Something simpler. And far more dangerous. They're not reacting, he said quietly. The pause. They're responding. The conclave expected the war to remain contained within fleets and borders. That was how conflicts worked. Two sides clashed. One side weakened. Terms followed. Everything else, trade, diplomacy, cooperation, paused until the outcome was decided. Humanity did not pause. While their fleets fought along the Kepler corridor, another kind of movement began, quiet, unannounced, and, at first, largely ignored. They sent people. Not soldiers. Not negotiators in the traditional sense. Something else. Commander Yuki Tanaka arrived on Dihel Prime without ceremony. No escort fleet. No formal declaration. Just a transport vessel and a request for audience. The Dihel Collective was not easy to communicate with. They were not individuals in the way most species understood individuality. They existed as a shared consciousness distributed across thousands of bodies, each one connected, each one contributing to a single unified mind. Conversations with them were different, slow, layered, demanding. Tanaka entered the communication chamber alone. It was a vast, pale-lit space with no visible walls, only soft gradients of light that shifted as the collective processed information. At the center stood a single interface node, a structure of smooth, reflective surfaces through which the D-hole spoke. She sat, said nothing. For nearly 3 minutes. The collective waited, not impatiently, processing, observing. Finally, Tanaka activated a data slate and placed it on the surface between them. The display showed a map, not of current battle lines, of history. Karth Dominion expansion over 200 years. Precise, uninterrupted, a steady outward growth pattern. Overlay projections appeared automatically. Future trajectories, predicted paths, highlighted zones. One of them intersected D-hole territory. Tanaka did not explain the map. She didn't need to. The collective processed it in under a minute. Thousands of perspectives aligning simultaneously. Patterns recognized. Outcomes calculated. Finally, the node emitted sound. You believe the Dominion will expand into our space? Yes, Tanaka said. You believe you will stop them? Yes. The pause. Longer this time. You are certain? Tanaka considered the word. No, she said. We're not certain. The collective adjusted. Then why do you act as if you are? Tanaka leaned forward slightly. Because certainty doesn't decide outcomes, she said. Preparation does. Silence. Not empty. Thinking. You are a young species, the collective said. The Dominion has been at war for 6 centuries. Tanaka nodded once. They've never fought us before. Another pause. The collective processed that. Deeply. You request alliance. No, Tanaka said. The word hung in the air. Unexpected. I'm offering context, she continued. We're going to win this. No emphasis. No arrogance. Just a statement. The question is whether you want to be part of what comes after. The chamber remained still. For 6 full minutes, the collective said nothing. Across thousands of bodies, calculations unfolded. Probability. Projection. Tanaka did not interrupt. She did not fill the silence. She waited. Finally, we will consider formal cooperation, the collective said. Tanaka nodded. That was enough. She stood. Turned to leave. One question, the collective said. She stopped. Why do your forces operate independently? It asked. Your fleet behavior does not follow unified execution patterns. Tanaka thought about that. We have a plan, she said. But the plan has room in it. Room. For people, she said. To think. To adjust. To make decisions when things don't go the way we expected. She paused. They never go the way we expect. The collective processed that. A plan that adapts. A plan that bends, Tanaka corrected. She left. Behind her, the collective continued thinking long after she was gone. The Orin did not think like the D-hole. They did not process ideas through thousands of perspectives. They focused on precision, perfection. Their engineering was unmatched, clean, optimized, mathematically exact, and deeply uncomfortable with what they had been observing. Human ships should not have worked the way they did. That was the problem. They were inefficient, overbuilt, redundant in ways that made no sense. And yet, they kept functioning under conditions where Orin vessels would have failed. Kofi Mensah arrived with a tablet full of notes and no formal presentation. He sat across from the Orin Engineering Council and glanced at the report they had prepared. 17 pages. Too thorough. Confused. You've been looking at our repair work? He said. Yes, replied Architect Ven. It is irregular. Kofi smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. That's fair. He pulled up a schematic. Highlighted sections. See this, he said. Backup routing. Secondary power lines. Manual override loops. Ven studied the display. They are inefficient, he said. They are, Kofi agreed. Until something breaks. He leaned forward. In your designs, failure happens outside expected parameters, he said. When it does, Systems collapse faster because everything depends on everything else being perfect. Ven said nothing. Kofi tapped the screen. Ours don't, he said. We assume things will go wrong. So we build systems that keep working when they do. The pause. You build for failure, Ven said. We build to survive it, Kofi replied. The room went quiet. Your ships are better than ours, Kofi added. Faster. Cleaner. More efficient. Another pause. But ours keep fighting longer. That was the moment. Ven understood it. Not emotionally. Structurally. You are proposing integration, he said. Partnership, Kofi corrected. Ven considered that. Ven nodded once. Accepted. Elsewhere, smaller conclave species received quieter visits. No speeches. No demands. Just conversations. Data. Patterns. And one consistent message. We are not asking you to save us. We are showing you what happens next. The Dominion noticed. Of course they did. They responded the only way they knew how. Pressure. Trade threats. Political leverage. Subtle coercion. Several minor species restricted human supply routes within their territory. For a moment, it appeared to work. Reports reached Earth. Supply disruptions confirmed. Transit delays detected. Then a second report followed. Simple. As expected. Attached to it? A new map. Alternative routes. Already active. Already supplied. Already functioning. They had been built 6 months earlier. Before the war. Before the ultimatum. Before the first shot. In the conclave analysis chamber, no one spoke. One officer finally said it out loud. They planned for this. A senior analyst nodded slowly. They planned for it before they knew they would need to. Dr. Varesh, standing at the back of the room, did not react. She already knew. She had written it years ago. Humans prepare for things they hope will never happen. Across the galaxy, fleets continued to clash. Ships continued to burn. But beneath that, something else was taking shape. Quiet. Connected. Deliberate. Humanity was not just fighting the war. They were building what came after it. The war had already taken thousands of lives. Then tens of thousands. Then more. Ships burned in silence. Stations fell. Colonies went dark. Still, humanity kept fighting. The Karth Dominion adjusted. Not tactically. Emotionally. They had learned something from the first months of the conflict. Human fleets did not break easily. Human strategies adapted faster than expected. Human alliances were growing. So they chose a different lever. Not fleets. Not infrastructure. Something else. Something that had worked against every other species they had ever fought. The target was not a military installation. It was not even a colony in the traditional sense. It was a transit vessel. A generation ship. Designation, Callisto. It had been traveling between 2 human systems for nearly 8 years, carrying over 4,000 civilians, families, engineers, children, people meant to build a future, not fight for one. Its trajectory was public. Its classification was clear. Non-combatant. The Karth fleet that intercepted it knew exactly what it was. That was not a mistake. It was a decision. The attack lasted less than 6 minutes. There were no warning shots. No demand for surrender. No attempt at boarding. The ship's engines were disabled first. Then its life support systems. It was destroyed. Across the conclave, the footage spread quickly. Not official broadcasts. Not sanctioned releases. Just fragments. Data leaks. Visual records. Enough to understand. More than enough. For the first time since the war began. Some delegates turned away not out of disinterest, but discomfort. This was unnecessary, one observer said quietly. Another didn't respond, because they both knew what it was. A message. Unavoidable. This is what happens if you continue. On Earth, the confirmation arrived in pieces. First, loss of signal. Then trajectory deviation. Then silence. And finally, verification. There were no survivors. For a brief moment, there was quiet. Not the controlled quiet of command rooms. Not the analytical silence of observers. Something deeper. Something heavier. Across cities, across colonies, across ships in transit, people stopped. But understood. The response did not come immediately. There was no speech. No declaration. No broadcast to the galaxy. It came 48 hours later. Every human military vessel, across every operational theater, updated its designation simultaneously. It was not encrypted. Not classified. It was transmitted openly. On all channels. Civilian. Military. Neutral. Enemy. One phrase. Remember the Callisto. It appeared on hull displays. On tactical feeds. On command screens. On recruitment centers. On station walls. On the inside of helmets. On the doors of ships preparing for deployment. It spread faster than any order ever had. Because it was not just an order. It was something else. A line had been crossed. And humanity had noticed. The Karth Dominion expected panic. They expected disruption. They expected fractures. They had used this method before. Against other species, it worked. Civilian losses created pressure. Pressure created negotiation. Negotiation ended war. That pattern did not repeat. On Earth, enlistment centers reported a surge within 24 hours. Not small. Not gradual. Immediate. Processing facilities were overwhelmed. New volunteers lined streets. Across colonies, recruitment queues formed in places that had never seen them before. People did not ask if the war would continue. They asked where they were needed. On the conclave observation feeds, analysts began tracking the shift. Civilian morale should be collapsing, one said. It isn't, another replied. Why? No one answered. Because the data didn't make sense. The Dominion escalated further. Not with fleets. With information. Their Psychological Operations Division initiated a full-spectrum broadcast campaign. Losses. Casualties. Destroyed cities. Burning ships. Numbers. They pushed everything they had across every accessible frequency. The intent was simple. Make the cost visible. Make it unbearable. Make it impossible to ignore. It worked. Partially. Human populations did react. There was grief. Anger. Fear. No one denied that. But something else happened. Something the Dominion had never seen before. Humans didn't hide the images. They displayed them. In city centers, large screens replayed the destruction. In recruitment halls, casualty numbers were posted openly. On colony walls, names of the dead were written, not removed. They took the Dominion's message and made it their own. This should be breaking them, a Karth analyst said. It's not, another replied. It's accelerating them. The Voice Corps commander reviewed the data 3 times. Then filed a report. Subject: Psychological campaign, human response. Conclusion: standard methods ineffective. Observation: exposure to casualty data increases recruitment and resistance levels. Recommendation: immediate cessation of all broadcast operations. The High Council approved the recommendation. The broadcasts stopped. It didn't matter. The images were already everywhere. The names were already known. The phrase had already spread. Remember the Callisto. In the conclave chamber, Sir Roland, the oldest Theri diplomat present, watched the feeds in silence. He had seen wars before. Many of them. He had seen species break. He had seen them surrender. He had seen them vanish. Was different. He turned slightly, looking toward Dr. Varesh. They've made it personal, he said quietly. Varesh didn't look away from the display. It was always personal, she said. The pause. Now they've named it. Roland considered that. Looked back at the screens. At the phrase repeating across human systems. At the quiet shift in everything. What does that mean? He asked. Varesh's answer was calm. But it carried weight. It means, she said, that the Dominion has given them a story. She paused. Just long enough. And humans with a story. Her eyes moved across the chamber. Across the observers. Across the ones who had laughed. Are the most dangerous thing in this galaxy. The Karth Dominion did not retreat. It regrouped. That was what it had always done. When resistance appeared, it applied more force. When resistance held, it applied overwhelming force. When resistance still remained, it erased it. That was the doctrine. That was how 6 centuries of expansion had been maintained. The High Council authorized the largest mobilization in Dominion history. Not a response. A conclusion. 412 warships. Command carriers. Siege platforms. Long-range artillery vessels designed for planetary suppression. 3 full strike formations drawn from across Dominion territory. Every available asset redirected toward a single objective. And the war. Decisively. Irreversibly. The target was not a border. Not a corridor. Not a fleet. The conclave watched the movement unfold in real time. There was no ambiguity. No misinterpretation. The Dominion was not attempting to win a battle. It was attempting to end a species. They're committing everything, one analyst said quietly. They always do, another replied. A third voice spoke, softer. Will it be enough? No one answered. Because this time, no one was certain. On the Dominion flagship, Sereth Val stood before a full strategic display of the operation. Vectors converging. Timelines aligning. Supply chains extending across multiple systems. Every variable accounted for. Every outcome modeled. Victory probability, overwhelming. They cannot match this, one of his commanders said. They won't try, another added. They'll consolidate. Defend their home system. Sereth did not respond. His eyes moved across the map, then paused. On something small. Almost insignificant. A series of minor supply nodes along the outer edge of their advance route. He narrowed his gaze. Status of Node 7? He asked. The officer checked. Operational. Node 12. Operational. Node 15. The pause. Minor delay reported, the officer said. Nothing significant. Sereth said nothing, but something in his posture shifted. Review all supply nodes, he said. Now. Hours passed. Reports came in. One by one. Node 7, disrupted. Node 12, compromised. Node 15, offline. Node 19, missing. What is this? One commander demanded. Sabotage, another replied. But from where? No one had an answer. Because there had been no engagement. No warning. No detected intrusion. Sereth stared at the display. The pattern was clear. Too clear. These were not random failures. They were selected. Precise. How long? He asked quietly. The officer hesitated. For what, sir? Sereth didn't look at him. How long have these nodes been compromised? More data scrolled across the screen. Deeper logs. Archived activity. Hidden signals. The officer froze. Then slowly looked up. Months, he said. The room went silent. Months. Before the war had reached this stage. Before the final mobilization. Before the Dominion had even committed its full force. They were here before us, Restel said quietly. No one corrected him. Because it was true. Across the advancing Dominion fleet, problems began to compound. Fuel deliveries delayed. Ammunition reserves misaligned. Navigation relays failing at critical junctions. Nothing catastrophic on its own. But together, they slowed everything. Just enough. On Earth, the human command structure did not react with surprise. They had been waiting. General Amarachin stood in the same council chamber as before. The same table. The same people. But the atmosphere had changed. Not tense. Focused. They're all in, someone said. Amara nodded. Yes. She brought up a map. Not of Earth. Of the Dominion advance routes. Highlighted in red. She overlaid another layer. Blue. Human positions. Hidden ones. Dormant ones. Prepared ones. They're coming through corridors we've already mapped, she said. We've disrupted their supply chain just enough to slow them, not stop them. The pause. Why not stop them completely? One advisor asked. Amara looked at him. Because we need them to keep coming. The realization spread across the room. Slow. Heavy. This isn't defense, someone said. Amara shook her head. No, she said. It isn't. In the conclave chamber, observers began to see it too. The patterns. The delays. The positioning. They're shaping the battlefield, one analyst whispered. Not reacting to it, another added. The Dominion fleet pushed forward anyway. It had no other option. Too committed to turn back. Too invested to reconsider. That was the nature of overwhelming force. Once it moved, it had to finish. They entered the outer perimeter of the Sol system. And that was when everything changed. The first sign was silence. Not the absence of communication. The absence of expected resistance. No defensive fleet at the perimeter. No immediate engagement. Nothing. They're falling back, a Karth commander said. Consolidating near their inner defenses. Sareth didn't answer. He was watching something else. Scan deeper, he said. Beyond standard range. The sensors extended. Pushed further. Past expected thresholds. And then, they found it. Not one fleet. Not two. Multiple. Human ships, previously undetected, positioned across multiple vectors within the system. Hidden behind debris fields. Stationed in low-signature orbits. Waiting. How many? A commander asked. The answer came back. Slowly. As the system resolved. More than initial projections, the officer said. That's not a number, the commander snapped. The officer swallowed. Significantly more. They weren't just defending Earth. They were surrounding the Dominion fleet. Ristel's voice was quiet. They let us come here. No one disagreed. On Earth, Amara watched the same moment unfold from the opposite side. She didn't smile. Didn't react. She simply gave the next order. Close the net. Across the system, human fleets moved. Not rushing. Not chaotic. Coordinated. Precise. Every vector aligning. Every position activating exactly when it needed to. The Dominion fleet tried to adjust. But their formations were already stretched. Their supply lines weakened. Their assumptions, wrong. For the first time in 600 years, the Karth Dominion was not advancing into a battle. They were inside one. And they hadn't chosen it. On the flagship, Sareth Vol finally understood. Not fully, but enough. This wasn't a response, he said quietly. No one spoke. His eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. On the tightening formation. On the ships that had been waiting. It was a setup. The battle for the Sol system did not begin with a charge. It began with pressure. The Dominion fleet, once advancing in perfect formation, now found itself stretched across multiple vectors, its cohesion fractured by delays it could no longer correct. Supply shortages were no longer minor inconveniences, they were operational failures. Weapon systems cycled slower. Shield reserves drained faster. Coordination lagged. And all around them, human fleets moved. Not in one overwhelming wave, but in layers. Controlled. Measured. Closing. They didn't strike all at once. They didn't need to. The first engagements were small. Targeted. A Dominion cruiser isolated on the outer edge of formation. Cut off. Surrounded. Disabled. Not destroyed. Left drifting. Then another. And another. Collapse inward, a Karth commander ordered. Reform central line. The fleet tried. But every attempt to regroup created new openings. And every opening was used. On the Endurance, Yara Solis watched the engagement unfold in silence. Her display was calm. Every movement accounted for. Every shift expected. Maintain pressure, she said. Do not overextend. There was no urgency in her voice. No strain. Only control. This was not a desperate defense. This was execution. Hours passed. Then days. The Dominion fleet fought. Efficiently. They adapted where they could. Countered where possible. But every adjustment came a step too late. Because the humans were not reacting. They were guiding. Fuel reserves at 30%, one Dominion officer reported. Reallocation. No surplus available. Forward batteries offline. Secondary systems? Already engaged. Navigation grid desynchronized. Manual correction? Too slow. The reports stacked. One after another. Each one small. Each one manageable. But together, unavoidable. On the flagship, Sareth Val stood motionless. He no longer gave rapid orders. No longer tried to force control back into the system. Because he could see it. Clearly now. Every failure, every delay, every opening, had been placed. They're not attacking us, Restel said quietly. Sareth didn't look at him. No, he replied. They're removing our ability to fight. And that was worse. By the third day, the Dominion fleet had lost operational cohesion. Not destroyed. Not annihilated. But broken. Ships remained. Weapons remained. But the system, the structure, the advantage, gone. On the fourth day, the signal was sent. It did not come from Earth. Or from the front lines. It came from a neutral channel. Broadcast across all frequencies. Open. Clear. Impossible to ignore. Karth Dominion Fleet. You are surrounded. Your supply lines are compromised. Your operational capacity is below recovery threshold. Further resistance will result in unnecessary loss of life. Stand down. There was no threat in the message. No anger. No triumph. Just fact. On the flagship, silence filled the command deck. Every officer knew. Every system confirmed it. Every projection led to the same conclusion. They could continue. They could fight. They could die. They could stop. Restel looked at Sareth. Sir. Sareth did not answer immediately. His eyes were on the stars. The same stars he had looked at weeks ago. When this had all seemed inevitable. Predictable. Simple. He thought of the file. The classification. The dismissal. The appendix. He thought of the line. Under existential threat, humans escalate. He exhaled slowly. They weren't escalating, he said quietly. The pause. They were preparing. Turned. Looked at his officers. At the fleet. At what remained. Transmit, he said. The message went out. Dominion fleet, standing down. Across the Sol system, human fleets held position. They did not advance. They did not fire. They waited. One by one. Dominion weapons powered down. Engines idled. Shields lowered. The war was over. In the weeks that followed, terms were established. Not dictated with cruelty. Not enforced with destruction. But clear. Final. The Karth Dominion would withdraw from all contested territories. Reparations would be issued. Biological warfare was formally banned under new conclave law, proposed by humanity, supported by those who had watched. Military expansion into neutral regions was restricted. Monitoring systems were established, not to control, but to prevent. There were no victory parades on Earth. No celebration broadcasts. No declarations of dominance. There were funerals. Quiet ones. Across cities. Across colonies. Across ships that would never return. And then, there was work. Human aid vessels moved into former conflict zones. Not just their own. Dominion worlds too. Medical support. Reconstruction teams. At first, the Dominion did not understand. They suspected manipulation. Strategy. Some deeper plan. But days passed. Then weeks. And the aid did not stop. In one small Dominion settlement on the edge of their territory, a human medical team treated civilians affected by supply shortages caused by the war. No conditions. No demands. A child asked one of the medics why they were helping. The translator struggled with the phrasing. But the answer came anyway. Because we can, the medic said. In the conclave chamber, months later, a new record was added to the archives. Not a report. Not a classification. Something simpler. An amendment. Humanity, updated assessment. Not the strongest. Not the oldest. Not the most advanced. But the most dangerous to underestimate. Dr. Varesh stood before the archive terminal as the entry was finalized. She read it once. Then added one final line. Not as analysis. Not as speculation. As a correction. Initial warning was provided. It was ignored. She paused. Then after a moment, added one more. They asked for peace. You asked for proof. The file closed. So, permanent. And across the galaxy. In quiet systems and crowded worlds alike. A new understanding settled. Humans did not win because they were stronger. They won because they prepared longer, adapted faster, endured deeper, and when it mattered most, they chose not to become the thing they were fighting.